Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of our podcast, Deen Thoughts, with your two favorite hosts, Mira and Adam. Alhamdulillah, we're hitting you guys back with another episode. Unfortunately, we were out for a little while. It has been a while, but we definitely missed you guys and missed the podcast grind. But it's the end of the school year, a lot of grinding happening. So, I hope you guys can forgive us for that. But inshallah, today we're back and we have a brand new episode, hopefully very beneficial for you guys. And stay tuned, inshallah. We have good things planned for the summer that, inshallah, we hope will happen and will benefit you guys as well, inshallah. Ya Rab. So today's topic, we will start by talking about Ikhlas. You want to introduce, Mina?
Yeah, so basically, whenever we want to do an action, right, any act of worship, we have to understand that there's specific criteria and there's specific, basically, yeah, criteria that the Deen has come with that we need to do in order for these actions to be accepted, right? So, any action that you do, you have to fulfill two things, which is first of all, that it's solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That any act of worship that you are doing it with the intention that it is solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, we'll talk about examples where you can have more than one intention, but none of those which go against it, like the concept of tawheed, right? The concept of the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second criteria is that any act of worship that you do has to be based on the teachings of the Quran and Sunnah. So, for example, you can't get up and say, I'm feeling extra spiritual today, so I'm going to pray 7 rak'ahs for Isha instead of 4." That action would be unaccepted, even though a lot of times we might think we're doing good by it. It has to be based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us, what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us, and we know that Isha is 4 rak'ahs. So, just taking this, like before we dive into the topic, any action that you do, if it's a religious action for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it has to be done based on tawheed, being solely for Allah, no association in partners, and it has to be based on the teaching of the Quran and Sunnah, as in based on how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us it should be done, not based on how we want it to be done.
Yeah, I think this is definitely a very important topic because I think we are constantly fighting kind of this our intention, right? So when we're doing an action, we are trying always to do this action solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because like Mira said, we want our action to be accepted. Whereas if we're doing our intention, for example, like I'm reading Quran and people are around me, I'm making my intention, oh, so these people think I'm a good person, I'm good in the deen, then obviously that intention is incorrect. And even doing a righteous act could lead you to the hellfire. And I think maybe we could start with that hadith if you would like.
The
Um,
one, okay.
yeah, you want to start? Because I think that one's a good segue into our topic, which basically, and this is a very famous hadith. You guys probably heard it before, but it's definitely a good reminder to always remind yourself of this hadith because you don't want to fall into this same category. So you go ahead and read the
Okay,
hadith.
but before we do that, just a second. That when you even look at the word ikhlas, right?
Yeah,
What Arabic word comes to mind? Like something being khalis, right?
khalis, yeah.
So like when we think about it, it's like for those of us that are Arabic speakers, you want something to be khalis li wajhillah. You want something to be solely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think we'll see this in the hadith that we're about to mention right now. But basically, it's a famous hadith about 3 men that will be brought on the day of judgment, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge between them. So it's narrated from Abu Hurairah that he said that the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, "Verily, the first to be brought to be judged on the day of the resurrection will be a man who died as a martyr, a man who memorized and led people in Quran, and a man who gave wealth for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." Like from the people, it seemed like he was giving wealth in front of the people. So they will be brought forward between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah will remind them of the favors He has bestowed upon them. So he'll look to the martyr, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, like, how did you express your gratitude towards me? And he would say, I fought in your cause until I was died as a martyr. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, you lied. You fought so that people might call you courageous, and they might say that you did so and so. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will command the angels to drag him and throw him into hellfire. The next man, the man who gained a bunch of knowledge, he read Quran, all of that, he will brought forward, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, what have you done to show your gratitude for the favor that I've bestowed upon you? And then the man will say, I acquired knowledge and taught it and read the Quran for your sake. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say to him, you have lied. You acquired knowledge so the people might call you a learned man. And you read the Quran so they might call you a reciter. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will command the angels to throw him in his face into hellfire. And the third man, the man who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him plenty of wealth, he'll be brought forth. And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, what have you done to show your gratitude for the favor that I've bestowed upon you? And he would say, I did not neglect any of the ways you liked wealth to be spent liberally for your sake. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, you have lied. You did it so that people might call you generous and that you have done so and so. And so he will command the angels to throw him into the hellfire. So, aside from the fact that in our eyes, these are three people who we would think Allah, they have a lot of hasanat, right? Someone who gained a bunch of beneficial knowledge and learned the Quran, someone who died as a martyr, and we've talked about the reward of martyrdom in our deen, and someone who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them wealth and they gave it generously. But we have to understand that. And one thing the first time that I was reading this, like right now, it just stuck out to me is that Allah asks all three of these, what have you done to express the gratitude? We have to understand that first of all, when we are doing ibadah, it's not because I had the ability to get up and memorize a page of Quran today, or I had the ability to get up and pray even Salat al-Dhuhr, or I had the ability to be respectful to my parents. It's all based on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the tawfiq to do. Allah gave me the ability to have this iman, to do all this. So first of all, to take a step and be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everything that He's done, for the guidance that He's given us, and to not take it for granted, because one of the scariest ayahs in the Quran to me is وَتَزَلُّ قَدَمٌ بَعْدَ ثُبُوتِهَا, that feet after they were firm, they're going to move, they're going to become shaken. So we might be on the straight path today, but we might be on the wrong one tomorrow. So take a moment to just thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And from that, by the way, and this hadith is a perfect example, is that any blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, the biggest way that you could say you are grateful for it is that you use it in a way that's pleasing to Allah. So whether it be your beauty, if you're beautiful, and every single one of us is beauty, as a woman, you should be protecting your beauty. You should not be beautifying yourself in front of the males, all of that. As a guy, everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, use it in a way that's halal. And for us, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us tawfiq for ibadah, is to do it solely for His sake.
Yeah, subhanAllah. I think honestly that hadith is very scary because it's something that we ourselves can fall into. It's not something that like it's a far-fetched hadith at all, because we are constantly, like I said earlier, like when you're doing an action, sometimes we need to be honest with ourselves. Sometimes our intention isn't straight. And if you find yourself in the middle of an action and your intention is not straight, then right then and there, change your intention. Just make it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And another thing I also want to mention is what's important is that some people might be like, I'm not doing this action because I'm worried my intention is not right. But that's actually wrong because, and the scholars will say this, and I've asked this question before, is if you're stopping an action for the sake of the fact that you're worried that your intention is going to be off, you might be falling into showing off, or maybe your intention is for others, then that the fact that you didn't do the action means that your intention was for showing off. What's better is for you to do the action and make your intention solely for Allah. Fight your intention, right? At the end of the day, none of us are going to have a perfect intention. None of us are going to be able to, every single ibadah that we have, just stand there and have 100% intention. And I remember I heard this before as well, is if you are comfortable with your intention, then know that that's from shaitan. That he's whispering to you that, oh, you're good with your intention now. You should honestly be constantly fighting yourself, your nafs and your intention. You should constantly be fighting it. That like you are trying to make it solely for Allah always. You shouldn't anytime be comfortable with what your intention is. And there was another thing I also want to mention to you. You said at the end there that people's feet, the ayah were at the end like the people's feet. What was the ayah again?
وتزل قدم بعد ثبوتها,
Right.
that the like feet will shake after they were firm.
Right. So, and that's something that's also really important. And that's another segue into the next hadith that I wanted to mention, which was, let me pull it up real quick. But basically, along the lines of the Prophet ﷺ says,
Make sure you guys are saying Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.
yeah, make sure you say it. Sorry, guys. Okay, I guess I don't have it.
Wait, when you look for it, can I actually mention something you
Go
meant?
ahead. Yeah, sorry about that. I thought I had. I don't know
No,
what
you're
happened.
good. But you mentioned a good point about like you not being like you always having to fight your intention, meaning it's a sign of iman. And this was not something that like we just say, but it was scholars of the past, like big name scholars, they used to say that when reciting one single hadith, imagine, and how long is this, like imagine it's like an average size hadith takes you maybe like 3 or 4 minutes. and they said they would have to rectify their intention over 100 times. Like by the time they start and end the hadith, they've remade the intention in their brain so many times. So like I feel like shaitan tries to come to us from different avenues. Like our dad always used to say, shaitan is gonna try to come to you from where he knows you're the weakest. So for a lot of us, it's the fear of intention that stops us from doing an action, and
Yeah.
maybe that's what might affect us the most. So we shouldn't let shaitan get to us to be like, oh, I'm not gonna do an action just because I'm scared of it. But also to understand that it's normal to be in this state. But I remember I asked my teacher about this one time, and she was saying, I think there's a hadith that says "Saddidu wa qaribu," and basically she was saying this hadith is evidence to say that fighting your attention is probably one of the most difficult things. And I think if you ask any of the shuyukh when they're put in positions where they're leading people, it's probably very difficult for them. But this hadith is saying "Saddidu wa qaribu," yani try as hard as you can and come near. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't expect us to be perfect. And I remember one time, it was actually one of your guys' mentors, he was saying that when you are like, let's say for example you're doing an action and you feel like in the middle of it your intention got changed, shaitan will come to you and say, oh well, your intention was like basically changed, so just stop doing the action altogether, or the action doesn't count anymore.
Yeah.
But he was saying, remind yourself to go back to the original intention. When I started this action, what was my intention? So kind of going back to and be like, no, Allah knows what my original intention was, and constantly rectifying our intention, something is very important as well.
Yeah, and one thing I will mention is one time I asked a qari, like a reader, reciter of the Quran, mashallah, his very beautiful voice, and we asked them like, how do you perfect your intention, or
Mm-hmm.
how do you fight your intention? What is your advice on that? And he said like, you just need to constantly be making dua. So like anytime I'm leading salah or anything, I'm always constantly making dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts my intention. And one thing that I found myself is, remind yourself of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you're doing this intention. These people that are around you, I think the biggest way that our intention is shaken is by showing off, right?
Mm-hmm.
By showing off the people around
Riya,
us. Riyah,
yeah.
right? That's one of and that's there's also a hadith that mentions that one of the smallest shirk that the Prophet ﷺ is worried about is riyah, or kama qala. I don't know
Yeah,
exactly, but
it
around those
creeps up
lines.
on us like the black ant in the darkness of the night.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So basically, he was afraid for us to do riyah, which is showing off in our deeds, and that's probably one of the biggest things. And so, one way I like to think about it is, why are we so worried about the people around us? You know, when we're in
Mhm.
the grave, number one, these people aren't going to benefit us at all. So sometimes it's good to remember that. And number two, if these people are happy with what you're doing, then imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is just the bashar. This is just a human being. They're happy. For example, let's say you're reciting Quran. They're like, wow, Allahumma barik, your voice is beautiful, or wow, like you are fluent in Quran. If the people are telling you this, imagine what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could be saying about you. So why am I doing it for the people when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who created me, and He can make the people on the earth and the angels in the heaven all love me. And that's another hadith
Subhanallah.
that we can also keep in mind, is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves someone, He will tell Jibreel, oh Jibreel, I love this person. So Jibreel will say, okay Allah, because you love this person, I love this person. So Jibreel will go tell all the angels, and all the angels will say, oh, because you love this person and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves this person, we all love this person. So can you imagine that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you, and for that sake everyone in the heavens loves you, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will also make the people on the earth love you. Yani this
Subhanallah.
hadith is something that really we should always keep in mind, because the bashar can't do anything for us, right? If you're doing something for just a human being, they're not going to benefit you except with just a little compliment. That compliment is going to boost your ego for a few minutes, and you're going to forget about it. But when you do something solely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to be happy with you. He's going to love you, and then all the angels are going to love you, and everyone in the world is going to love you. So that's why it's such a, like, your intention is easier to get straight when you think about it this way. You know, try to always remember these things so that you can perfect your intention.
And I think we mentioned this before. I don't know the exact hadith, but it's something along the lines that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves to listen in on one of his slaves reading Quran when they beautify their voice. So
Mm-hmm.
like imagine that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he sees you, yani take it for example, the hadith that mentions that the one who wakes up in the middle of the night and it's a cold night and it's their bed was so comfortable and warm, and they get up and they make wudu and they pray 2 rak'ahs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala smiles at this slave. And the ulama, they explain the smile of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to mean that they'll be like the punishment of Allah won't touch them. So yani Allah sees you when you're doing these actions. He's smiling at you. He's listening into on you reading Quran. Yani as-sami' loves to listen to you reading Quran.
Yeah.
So understanding kind of that like Allah is seeing everything that you're doing. Like we say that, oh, Allah's watching me, but no, literally. And that reminds me, before you mentioned that hadith, there's the dua that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he taught us to say, which is Allahumma inni a'udhu bika an ushika bika wa ana a'lam. Oh Allah, I seek refuge in you that I do shirk, that I associate with your partner, and from that is riya, showing off, because it is a form of minor shirk. While I know, like, if like I seek refuge in you, then I do it while I know.
Yeah.
وَأَعُوذُ بِكَ بِمَا لَا أَعْلَمُ, and I seek refuge in you for that which I don't know. So it is important, like you said, to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us rectify our intention, that our intention is solely for His sake.
Yeah. And that also shows the love that you have for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're doing something solely for His sake, then you're doing it because you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you wake up in the middle of the night while everyone is sleeping and you wake up and pray rak'atan qiyam al-layl, then you are doing that solely because you genuinely love this connection and you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's something that is actually like we have to love Allah more than we love ourselves.
Yeah.
And there's a hadith on that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's also one way that we can constantly try to do that. Going on, I'll mention the hadith. Sorry, I couldn't pull it up earlier, but now we
It's
have it,
okay.
alhamdulillah. And so this hadith basically says that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, verily deeds are only judged by how they were at the end of life. And so this hadith is basically stating that and actually, let me read. There's also another hadith that basically relates, and it's I think like similar hadith, and it says, "Verily, a man may appear to people as doing the deeds of the people of paradise, yet he is among the people of hellfire. Verily, a man may appear to people as doing the deeds of the people of hellfire, yet he is among the people of paradise." So basically, maybe their whole lives they're doing ibadah, and then at the end of their lives they do an action of kufr, right, or a haram action, or something of those lines, and then since at the end of their life they did that, then they're going to go into the hellfire, right? So it's based on your ending, not just throughout what you do throughout the whole life. It's also what you end with, and the vice versa. Someone may be doing kufr the whole life, but then at the end of their life they do something halal, and then they go to Jannah. So my thought, I remember one time Sheikh was giving us a talk and he mentioned this hadith, and my thought was, well, how does this compare to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy? Because obviously that person was doing good their whole entire life, but then at the end of their life they just did one small, or not small, but they did an action of haram or whatever it may be, and they entered the hellfire. How come? So I asked him, and he said there was, I think it was another hadith or something, where basically they said that man who was doing the good his whole entire life, he wasn't sincere in his actions towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's something important to note, because and one of my friends, he told me this yesterday, and I really love the analogy. He said, imagine you're working with someone in business for 40 years, and then on the 41st year you realize that for those 40 years he was stealing from you. So then you're not going to talk to him again.
Oh, subhanallah.
It was such a good analogy. I loved it.
Yeah.
Because you think about it, you're like, yeah, for those 40 years he's stealing from me. Even though we were doing good together, he was stealing from me. So
like your image of them is just ruined.
Exactly, ruined.
And that's us as bashar, as insan. Then what about Rabb al-Alameen?
Right? So basically, you may be doing these actions, but your intention is not sincere for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then that's why you see that maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not accepting your deeds for that reason. You understand?
Wow, I never thought about it like that, subhanallah. Okay, next hadith.
Yeah, we can go on.
Should I bring the next one? Okay. So the next hadith, and I think some of you guys might have heard the story, but it was reported to us that the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah told him about a story of 3 men who basically they were in the desert and they were traveling, and they started getting like rained on. So it started raining while they were in the desert. So they decided to take refuge in a cave in a mountain nearby. While they were in the mountain, a boulder fell over the opening of the cave, so the 3 men that were inside weren't able to get out anymore. So they all looked at each other and they said, let's look at the good deeds that we've done for Allah and call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by them, so that maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can relieve us. So the first one, he said, oh Allah, I had 2 old parents with my wife and young children, and basically every single night he used to come with them with milk to serve them. and he would feed his parents before he would feed his own wife and kids. And one day when he went to look for the milk, he came back like a little bit later in the evening. And when he came, he found that his parents had both already went to bed. So he went and stood there literally the whole time, waiting for his parents to wake up. And imagine, yani, his child was crying, his wife wanted to eat as well, but he continued standing there until around like Fajr time, until his parents woke up, and then he fed them. And he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you know that I did this solely for your sake, then relieve us from this distress. And it's narrated that the boulder moved a little bit, so like they could see like a little crack of it, like a
Yeah.
little bit of the space was open. So the second man, he said, "Oh Allah, I had a cousin whom I loved more than any man could love women." Yani he very much liked this cousin of his. And he presented himself like for marriage to her, but she refused. And this man, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed him with a lot of wealth. And basically, like a couple years later, after she had turned him down, his cousin fell into a position where she needed money. She was very financially in distress. And so he came to her and he basically told her if she participates in him with like unlawful relation, he'll give her money. And right before he was about to, she told him, "Fear Allah." So he basically stood and he gave her the money and he like turned away from her, even though he really liked her. So he said, "Ya Allah, if you know that I did this solely for your sake, seeking your rida, seeking your pleasure, then move us from this distress." And so once again, the boulder moved. Then the last man, he said, "Oh Allah," he had a person who was employed for him. And basically, when it came time to pay him, he got mad because he was expecting more money, even though the agreement was that that's how much he would pay him. So he left without accepting any of the money. So the man who like he was working for took that money and invested it, and his money grew and grew and grew, and it turned into like like a big amount of like livestock. So when the man came back and he asked for his money, he gave him not only the money that was originally his, but the investment as well. And so he said, "Ya Allah, if you know that I did this solely for your sake, then relieve us from this distress." And then after all three of them had shared their stories, the boulder fully moved. So what do we see from this? The concept that, because I was actually talking to this with the girls, and I don't want this hadith to make us. You know how some people they do actions in exchange for something else.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'll say, "Ya Allah, if I read 10 pages of Quran, give me this." Or if
Yeah.
I do this, I do this. This isn't what this hadith is saying.
Right.
This hadith is talking about the ikhlas, the sincerity in the action, that when you are doing a specific action, your only intention is to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I don't want it to get mixed up with us asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for things in exchange, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us and He is not in need of our worship and we are in need of Him. So it's very disrespectful for us to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for something in exchange. I'm not saying don't ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through dua, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying to like kind of like tatmannu, like to like put, I don't know how to
I
explain it.
will. I
What's
will clarify. So you're allowed to say, "Ya Allah, I did this good action for your sake." So through that, like, "Ya Allah,
the
please."
sincerity through that, which is what they
Exactly.
did.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
you're allowed to do that, but I
Yeah.
think what Mina's trying to say is don't do actions just so you can make dua through them.
Yeah.
Right. That's
Or
what you
be
mean.
like, if you let me pass this exam, I'll fast 3 days. Like
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
you,
Yeah. Yeah.
that is, it's very, very much disliked. And I don't even know if it's makruh or it's haram. I don't know, Allahu alam. But I'm just
Yeah.
saying, like, that's not what this hadith is trying to
Right.
say.
Right. You want to look at the intention, the sincerity that they had, and for that sake, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala rewarded them.
Yeah.
But yeah, subhanallah. And one thing I will say, especially, is how unique those actions were.
Mm-hmm.
It's not your normal qiyamul layl, but rather like super unique actions that that man who stopped the sin solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake. And many of us, we may find ourselves in that situation on a weekly basis
Mm-hmm.
where we're about to do a sin, but we find ourselves remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching us, so you stop it just from your fear of Allah's punishment. And so that's something that we can keep in mind as well. Like if we can stop doing a sin, that in itself is a good deed.
Yeah.
From you just fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, stopping doing the sin because you fear Allah, that in itself is a good deed. Or that person who he waited for his parents, Birrul Walidain, right? He like cared so much to the point where he just waited and he knew that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would reward him. So those actions are so unique, and that's what I like about that hadith, is they're so unique, and it shows us that we can be sincere in all of our actions.
Mm-hmm.
It's not only about the ones that we are doing secretly, or it could be any of the actions, we should try to be as sincere as possible. We have to be sincere. You understand?
And I think another thing that I want to, like, another point that I want to focus on is that I think there's a hadith, and it was a hadith, I don't remember the exact wording of it, but it's along the lines that, like, there's, you know how, like, in our deen, there's, you can be like a Muslim, a mu'min, or a muhsin. So
Mm-hmm.
there's Iman, Islam, or Iman,
Ihsan.
Islam, Ihsan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Islam, Iman, Ihsan.
Yeah.
So there's different levels. And from that, it's the same thing. Like when you do an act of worship, you're aside from the fact of that it has to be sincere and you come with sincerity, but you could wish, like for example, I could do this act of worship solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but I'm wishing that Allah gives me his Jannah, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm wishing that Allah gives me goodness, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they say the highest level is that when you do an act of worship solely for the pleasure of Allah, like you
SubhanAllah.
already know Allah is going to reward you, but you're just saying this, I'm literally just doing this because I want you to be pleased with me and I want you to love me.
Yeah.
So that's kind of going back to what you're saying. And this hadith is a prime example. Like when you, like after I read this, it's like I looked at myself and I'm like, what action do I have that if I were to stand before Allah, I would be able to say this? What is something that you did that was solely for the sake of Allah, that you can say, Ya Allah, I did this. Though I tried to have ikhlas in all my actions, this one was just unique. It was solely for your sake. Like I just can't explain, because no one knows the difficulty of your action more
Mm-hmm.
than Allah.
Yeah. I really like that. To compare yourself to that hadith. You know what I mean? I
Mm-hmm.
was listening one time to a lecture, and he was saying like, the sheikh was saying basically like, do you have an action that you could say that when you're doing the action, ya Allah, I don't even care who sees what I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing. I don't care, as long as you're happy, ya Allah, I'm happy. Do you have an action like that? If not, then pick up an action that you are doing and make your intention every single time you do it. Just think, ya Allah, I don't care who sees me, what happens. I just care that, ya Allah, you're watching me and you're happy with what I'm doing. That's all I care. That's the only reason I'm doing this action. That way you have like a sincere, like at least you think you have, or not you think, like you try to be sincere as much as possible, you
Yeah.
know?
And that's why, by the way, like they tell you what's one of the best ways to develop sincerity is that you do more acts of good in private than
Secret,
you
yeah.
do in public. Because when you're doing it in public, naturally you're going to be constantly fighting your intention.
Exactly. Yeah.
But when you're doing it alone, you know for a fact it's only for Allah.
Mhm.
And by the way, this was, yani, we see this in Surah Al-Insan. It talks about إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا, right? That we are feeding you for the sake of Allah only. We don't want from you praise. We don't want money. We don't want anything. And this is talking about Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu anha. So that when they used to get any food or anything in the house of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they used to give it right away. They were very, very generous. So that's how we should be. And by the way, like I was watching a video and it was saying like, let's say for example, you did something for your parents, like you emptied the dishwasher or you folded the laundry, right?
Yeah.
You're doing it with what intention? For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but for birrul walidain. And this is an example where your intention can be like to please your parents, but
Mm-hmm.
it's based on a commandment that Allah, like it's not shirk because it's like you're doing it for birrul walidain, but it's like for the sake of Allah as well,
Exactly.
right? So like let's say for example, you folded the laundry, but then your mom didn't acknowledge the fact that you folded it. Naturally, you would get discouraged and be like, well, she didn't even say anything, so next time I'm not going to do it.
Mhm.
Then you have to remind yourself of this ayah. إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا. That I'm not doing this, yeah, as much as I want my mom to like see it because I'm trying to be respectful and like, give them the right that they have. I understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who commanded me to have respect to them, saw that action. And that's all that matters. So a lot of times it's like, don't get discouraged as well. It's like when you're doing stuff for the sake of Allah, everything, like when you do something for the sake of Allah and for someone else, you might not get the full, like you might not get the full praise that you were looking for. But when you do it for the sake of Allah, trust me, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you in this world and the hereafter.
Yeah. SubhanAllah, the nafs is always looking for recognition.
Mm-hmm.
So you're like, when you're doing an action, you may subconsciously always be looking for someone to praise you for that action.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you need to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is happy with you if you're doing it for his sake. It's hard because we can't see Allah, we can't hear Allah, and that's why it's to believe in what you cannot see, ilmul ghaib,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as long as I am sincere in my intention, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is happy with me. I don't need some human being's praise. What is a human being's praise compared to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's praise? You know what I mean? So like it's important that we always remember that Allah's praise is higher and better than any other person's praise, even though we can't hear it or see it or no matter what. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It brings to mind, you know that one time the hadith where I think it was Sitna Aisha, the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam slaughtered like I think it was like a sheep or something, and they were
Mm-hmm.
giving it away in charity. And Sitna Aisha, the Prophet asked her like, "What did you give away?" And she said everything but the shoulder, because the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he
Likes
used to
the
love
shoulder,
the
yeah.
meat of the shoulder. And then the Rasul corrected her and he said everything was left except, or everything was stayed except for the shoulder, it was left.
Mm-hmm.
Yani he's trying to tell her that the reward was with everything that we gave away, not what we kept. And for that, it reminds me that there's the ayah in the Quran, I don't know exactly what it is, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he talks about people when they slaughter, they say that this is for our shuraka and for Allah. And he says that this reaches their shuraka, but it doesn't reach Allah. So like it's that concept that like when you're doing something on the day of judgment, imagine you had done so many actions and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings you and you're like ready to present them to Allah, and Allah tells you, but you know deep down that this was for them as well. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-ghani. He is the most rich, the most self-sustaining. He doesn't need our ibadah. So for him, he'll just say, well, it wasn't for me. So go get the reward from them. Imagine Allah telling you to go get reward from the people that praise you in this dunya. And on that day, it's nafsi
Yeah,
nafsi.
he's saying you already got the reward in the dunya. You got their praise.
Exactly.
That's enough.
Exactly.
And that's the point, that the reward in this dunya is so minute.
Yeah.
You get like seriously, you get nothing. All you get is a little ego boost.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why you need to be patient, and it takes patience. Let's be honest.
It does,
It
yeah.
takes patience because once again, you're not seeing the reward right now. You may not see it, and maybe you will. Maybe Allah Subhanahu wa Taala will put barakah in your life. Maybe He will reward you in this dunya as well, because that's also possible. Allah may reward you in this dunya for actions you do, but you need to remember that the akhirah is what we're going after,
And
right?
like you said, it's normal to want that sense of attention. Yani, that's what we get from the praise, right?
Right.
It's not that, oh, they saw that I did it, but it's like, oh, mashallah, your voice is so nice. Like all of this stuff that we get, we like to be the center of attention. So it is naturally something that's difficult for us to fight.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the ayahs in Surah Al-A'la, where Allah Subhanahu wa Taala says, "بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا والآخرة خير وأبقى." So
Yeah.
you're preferring the worldly life. You're going after this, the dunya, but the akhirah, the hereafter, it's much better, and it's much more, it's way
Mm-hmm.
better than this dunya,
Yeah.
because the dunya offers you nothing. And we could sit here and talk about the dunya. Maybe I don't know if we've ever done an episode on the dunya and
I
how
don't think we have, but that's a good
we should
topic.
probably do them,
Yeah.
because there's so many ahadith and so many like ayahs where Allah's and the Prophet, they basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes the dunya,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Do you have one? Let's mention one right now.
For example, the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cared even, what was it, the mosquito's wing
Yeah.
of just cared about it in the mosquito's wing of the dunya, then He wouldn't what was it again? Let me pull it up. I
Basically,
don't want to say it
the
wrong.
hadith is that if this world and everything that it contained to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mattered even as much as the wing of a mosquito,
Yeah,
then no one in this world who's like a kafir would have had even a sip of water to
that's what
drink.
it was. Yeah,
And they have way more than just water. They
exactly.
have palaces and everything. So that should show you, and by the how much Allah doesn't care about this dunya. And also the word dunya, by the way, means something that's low.
Yeah,
In the Arabic
subhanallah.
language, it's something that's like very low. So yani, Allah
Mhm.
doesn't care about it. Or the hadith about Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam when he was walking with the Sahaba and he saw a dead carcass and
Yeah.
he said, who would buy this from me? And they all looked at Rasulullah and they were like, why would we buy this from you? It has no value.
Right.
And he said, this is exactly how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees this dunya.
I think we've done an episode, because I
Maybe
remember
we've
mentioning
mentioned it
these.
before. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah, we
remember.
mentioned all these hadith. But basically, and it's also trusting that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is Alim. He
Yeah.
knows, right? We've only seen this dunya,
Mm-hmm.
but Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is Alim. He's created the dunya, created the akhirah.
SubhanAllah.
So we need to trust that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala knows what He's like. Obviously, He knows what He's
Yeah.
talking about. He's Alim, right? So Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, when He tells you that this dunya is nothing, trust that this dunya is nothing.
Yeah.
You're only here for a limited time. What, like 80, 90, maximum 100 years, okay, but the akhirah is forever, right? So it's khair, it's wa abqa, is better. So always remember that, you know what I mean?
SubhanAllah. What no eye has ever seen and no ear has ever heard
Subhanallah.
and no mind has even imagined.
For the
Imagine that.
akhirah, yeah, for
Yeah.
Jannah. May Allah make us of those who
Ameen.
enter paradise, and it should always be our goal, right?
Yeah.
Keep it in front of you, because sometimes we lose sight. Sometimes we're caught up in the dunya,
Mm-hmm.
and that
And
happens
that's
to all of
normal.
us.
Yeah.
That happens to all of us. But it's always good to remember the akhirah, death. To remember these things to kind of shake you.
The destroyers of pleasures. I
Exactly.
think one thing that you really mentioned that I really liked is the concept of like ilm al-ghayb, right?
Hmm.
That when we do an action, it's knowing that there is a reward, even if we don't see it. And I feel like that helps with everything because, like, right now, especially in the summertime, and I think we've done an episode on this before, but the concept of like lowering your gaze, right? That's something very difficult. But when you have this concept of ilmul ghaib and you know the reward that comes with it and you know how much Allah is pleased with it, you're going to do it. So it's
SubhanAllah.
understanding that there's a whole side of our deen and the reward that we don't see, but when you believe in it, it makes the action a little bit easier.
Yeah,
Like,
SubhanAllah.
it's not easy for the sisters to be going out in full abayas and in dresses and all the
Yeah.
layers now in this hot weather, but we believe that this heat is from a breath from the breath of Jahannam.
Yeah.
So if it's hot now, then hell is even hotter, you know?
Hmm.
So it's that I like that is like kind of always reminding ourselves that there's a lot to this dunya and this hisab that we don't see,
Hmm.
so we can't get boggled down in what we do see.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
I'm actually done. Do you have anything
There's
else?
one more hadith I
Oh,
think that we had.
so I mean, this hadith we've mentioned it probably like every single episode,
Oh,
really.
yeah.
But we could definitely bring it back up just so you
I have
guys.
another one though.
Okay, go ahead.
I do. There's
You
a
can say that
hadith
one.
that's narrated by Abu Huraira that says that the Messenger of Allah, he said, it's a hadith Qudsi, so Allah is speaking and he says, I am so self sufficient that I am in no need of having an associate. Thus, he who does an action for someone else's sake as well as mine will have that action renounced by me to him whom he associated. And it's narrated in Muslim. So we already mentioned this, but I just wanted to mention this hadith because I recently learned it and I feel like it's clear cut evidence for what we were talking about today.
Yeah.
Yani Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al ghani, right? Like, He created this whole universe and He doesn't need us in it. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted, He could wipe us out and bring another creation. So understanding that we are in need of Allah. So that also makes it a little bit easier to know that when you're doing the action, do it for the one who doesn't need it, but the only one who can reward you for it.
Hmm.
But yeah, you want to mention the hadith?
Um, yeah, we can. And I will say there's oh sorry. There's one thing like a saying from Ibn al-Qayyim which basically says it kind of relates to this is that it's along the lines he was saying. I don't have it in front of me to be honest, but I remember it and it stuck with me because it said like it's not amazing to see a person who is in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala worship Allah, but rather it's to see
Oh
someone
yeah,
who is to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who doesn't need anyone happy for a servant who worships him along those lines. So basically, like you're saying, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He doesn't need any of our actions, obviously, right? But it's so amazing to see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to worship. He wants this connection. He wants this love
subhanallah.
that we have, or not like, you know what I mean, though. Like He
Yeah,
wants this connection, and He loves us to have this connection with Him. So subhanAllah, that's such an amazing
I
attribute.
never thought about it like that. It was even like that's like why they say like the one like for example, you know the saying where they say like someone who's poor and they're also like being very picky. Like
Hmm.
that's worse because like they I don't remember what it was, but it was Sheikh Majid Mahmoud.
Yeah.
He was mentioning it as something along the lines where it's like it's kind of like when you have the ability, like for example, when you're in ease, right? Or where that's why, by the way, like why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the most beloved people to Allah, is someone who was young and grew up in the worship of Allah. And young, by the way, the scholars say it's below 40 because
Hmm.
that's usually a time where you have the most energy, you have the most desire. But though you're in the state of being able to displease Allah, you're not doing it. So it kind of relates to that.
Yeah, subhanAllah. So the last hadith is basically just verily deeds are only with intentions, and every person will have only what they intended. Whoever immigrated to Allah and His Messenger, his immigration is for Allah and His Messenger. Whoever immigrated to get something in the world or to marry a woman, his immigration is for that to which he immigrated. Basically just saying that whatever you're intending, that's what you're gonna get. So if you're intending Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's reward, then inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you. But if you're intending something for the dunya when you do your actions, then that's what you're gonna get. And it goes back to the hadith of the first three people to enter the hellfire. So it's a scary hadith, definitely something that we constantly need to keep in mind. Um,
I
Try to
should
perfect your intention,
just
inshallah.
want to mention one more thing, two more things. First of all, I remember one time someone asked the question to one of your guys' sheikhs about like the concept of ikhlas, and especially if you're doing actions in front of people, right? And he mentioned the ayah وَبِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ, and in the pleasures of your Lord, like talk about them, kind of like in the sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you the tawfiq to be able to pray, given you the tawfiq to be able to read Quran. So be someone while keeping your attention for the sake of Allah who encourages people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because with you reading Quran in front of your friends could encourage them to become someone who wants to read Quran. So
Yes.
like we shouldn't ever shy away from like not doing acts of worship and like around people because you never know who you might be inspiring as well.
I
And
like that. And sorry to cut you
go
off,
ahead.
but there needs to be a balance between public actions and private actions.
Yeah.
So I'd say everyone here, if you don't have an action that you do privately, pick up an action that you do privately
Mm-hmm.
today. It should be today that you say, okay, I'm gonna do. It could be anything. One thing I really think that everyone here should start is qiyam al-layl, which is
Yeah.
any. It could be any time after maghrib. You can pray to qiyam al-layl, just 2 rak'ahs, whatever it may be. Make it private action. But like Mira saying, also the public actions are important because your intention could be like, let's say I'm reciting in a beautiful voice. My intention could be for the people who are listening to me, I want to encourage them, ya Allah, to also learn the Quran and become more fluent and have nicer voices. If my intention is that, then my intention is still for Allah,
Yeah.
right? Your intention isn't to please the people, your intention is to encourage the people. And so that's why, like you
To
said,
be a
and
leader. Yeah.
exactly, and that's why also when they do the donations, many of the people
Yeah.
say it's still good for you to do donations out loud to encourage the others,
Yeah.
because then you will get, inshallah, the ajr for the other people who are also
Inshallah.
donating, who got encouraged, right?
And even like when you look at the Quran, right? What's that Surah Al Ikhlas?
Mm-hmm.
Talking about like the concept that Allah, the oneness of Allah, it equates to Thuluth Al Quran.
SubhanAllah, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So why is it that surah in specific? Like would they say when you read that surah once is as if you read a
The
whole
third of the
third of the
Quran,
Quran.
yeah.
So if you read it 3 times, it's as if you read the whole Quran.
SubhanAllah.
So like why is that surah in specific have so much weight? Because it talks about sincerity, it talks about the oneness of Allah. So that's very important. The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also points that out is something that we can't be heat about. Like we have to understand that it was mentioned for a reason.
Yeah, SubhanAllah. Are you done? We're good.
That's it.
All right, guys. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you made it to the end, please make sure to share with others who can benefit, so you can also get some reward, inshallah. Like I said, stay tuned, inshallah. I hope we're hoping to have big things planned. Inshallah, make doubt that they happen, and then we can get you guys some nice guest speakers, inshallah.
Inshallah.
And yeah, that's all for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Assalamu alaikum.